wanted to let you know that we've heard from some of our guests, they're still in traffic and people are still arriving. So we're going to start in about 15 minutes and hope that that doesn't hold anybody up. And I'll also give a little bit of information at the end of the program. We'll be convening in the ensemble room for a reception, and India Joe's is graciously doing the food for us. It's quite lovely. In order to get into the ensemble room, just so you're aware, you can either come down here to this door and it will take you directly in there, or you can go up to the lobby. There's an elevator. You can take the elevator down to 1 in the elevator and come out of the elevator, and that will take you in the direction of the ensemble room, and there'll be people down there directing traffic. Just so you know, we hope everybody will stick around and drink heartily and enjoy each other's company. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you for indulging us with a bit of a late start. Welcome, everyone. I think we're ready to start. I know Martin just stepped out for a moment, but I think we'll get going. I wanted to say on behalf of Serena, the entire Hall family, and Tim, thank you for joining us today to celebrate Linda's extraordinary life. Indeed, it has been very extraordinary. My name is Barbara Bierstein. My friendship with Linda spans 53 continuous years of sharing much of our intimate and professional lives. There's too many memories to recount here, and I'm not going to take up the time to do that. Many of you have come from great distances, from all over the United States, from here in Santa Cruz County and throughout California, Washington, Oregon, Maine, Arizona, and more. A sizable contingent is watching live stream in your home countries worldwide, like Java, Bali, New Zealand, the Netherlands, England, France, to name just a few. Truly, it's a worldwide audience of people who loved and had great esteem for Linda. I've heard from many people who couldn't join today in person or online. They've shared wonderful stories of music making and friendship. Each of you in this panoply of individuals have been integral to realizing the rich tapestry of Linda's life. I like to think of us as the clan of Linda, forged together by affection, her colleagues, collaborators, friends, and family. It's impossible to do justice to recounting the life of such a creative, dynamic individual in our all too brief time together today. So we hope you will embellish our offering by sharing your personal stories of Linda with each other during the reception following this program and in the memory books in the lobby. Linda is so much more than the accomplishments recounted in her formal biography contained in the program. You could never categorize her. Her passion, voracious interest in world music and cultural anthropology, and unbridled enthusiasm for Baroque music and community engagement propelled her forward her entire life. Her friendship with each of you meant the world to her. She was so full of life and always had a twinkle in her eye when sharing her passion for something new, different, or just plain fun, and she liked to have fun. As Janie Larson recently said, she was full of hijinks and shenanigans, and Janie had many stories to share to back that up. Linda played the accordion with gusto. She rarely missed an opportunity to join Charlie on a Wednesday night sailing race, host a hot tub party, bring people together to share a meal, or engage in music making. On 9th Avenue and later in Ben Lomond, her living room was a gathering place where a large red leather-padded barber's chair became center stage. In recent years, since marrying Tim, Linda developed a passion for bonsai and viewing stones. That passion took her to Japan on several occasions, and I know it was always a delight and wonder for her. She talked about it. She was a devoted Burmese cat breeder, and she carried all the little kittens, the kuching, which is Malay for cat, under her shirt until they were adopted. And they all became sweet, loving, undercover kitties as they aged, much to the delight of those of us who were lucky enough to get a kitten who was raised by Linda. Most of all, though, becoming a mom to Serena was her pride and joy. Let's begin, shall we? Ed Houghton, can you approach the podium to get our program underway?
What can we say about the force that was Linda? How can we summarize the range and depth of her many accomplishments? I found it quite daunting when I thought of the more than 50 years that I have known Linda as a colleague and a friend. And you will hear from us today much about her fully engaged life. There is much to say. I will tell you a few aspects of her academic life that you may not know. One of her earliest achievements is not on her CV, one that Barbara just mentioned. Linda told me a few years ago when she was very young in Los Angeles, she won first prize in a performance competition. I was impressed. What did you play? I asked. She said, accordion, she replied. I was astonished. She was amused. In the early 1970s, I was a young professor, one of the few still here who remembered Linda's first years on campus. She appeared with a freshly minted PhD from Princeton, with an emphasis on the relatively new field of ethnomusicology. As an undergraduate at UCLA, she had been well prepared there, a very strong music program, and among the first with distinction in ethnomusicology. In 1976, I was a relatively new chairperson of the Board of Studies in Music, as it was called, and it was my responsibility to assemble her personnel file, call a meeting of the music faculty to vote on new appointments, and submit a recommendation for Linda's appointment as lecturer in music. It was successful. In 1979, we recommended her to assistant professor. In 1982, to associate professor, and in 1988, to full professor. None of what you see around this area today was here when Linda started. It was essentially a transitional landscape between the majestic redwood forest and the Great Meadows. Linda was deeply involved in many of the things that happened. Two important changes affected the arc of Linda's academic career. Assistant Professor David Kilpatrick, with the support of Vice Chancellor of Humanities, Joe Barber, was successful in persuading UCLA to lend us a Javanese gamelan. They had no room to store it. We promised to house it, care for it, and use it in our program. Its first home was up the hill in the old music building, some of you remember, in a room now used as a green room for the second stage of theater arts. Linda was clearly excited. She took full advantage of this rare resource and plunged into the cultural world of Indonesia. My strongest memories of those years involved her work on an English translation of a very important book on Indonesian music. It was called The Art of Music Among the Madurese, published in 1928 by Johann Sebastian Brants Bijs and his wife Anna. It was published only in Dutch. From Linda, I heard the name Brants Bijs so many times that I never forgot it. Linda engaged deeply with the gamelan and brought the Sundanese master, Pak Undang Sumarna, here to teach our students and lead the ensemble. Shortly after, campus efforts to improve the acoustic deficiencies of the music building, the green room that I just mentioned among them, failed miserably. and we began to plan for a new music center. My colleagues, many convinced that it would never happen, suggested that I lead the planning. Linda worked very closely with me on the design of the gamelan room. Every step, no, every square foot of the way. It soon became a separate building. It had room for a new Balinese gamelan, which Linda acquired, and where she taught and served as leader. When the weather is fair and the windows are opened, this area and the great meadow below resound with the music of Indonesia. As a colleague, Linda was extraordinary. Extraordinary in the breadth and depth of her interests, their range and diversity, from Europe to Asia, from the Middle Ages to now. She was always well prepared and tenacious in what she saw as important. She had the imagination to envision what was not yet, but could yet be. She had the executive skills to find talented people and make things happen. As Dean of the Arts Division, I formed an advisory committee for South Asian Studies. Linda was always there, an important and effective member. She frequently drove over Highway 17 with me and Professor Dilip Basu to meet other members of the committee, our Indo-American friends in Silicon Valley. We raised several large endowments, produced a major concert of Indian music at the Flint Center in Cupertino, appointed a renowned Sarod master, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, as a distinguished adjunct professor to teach our students, brought Dr. Kapila Vatsayan, director of the Indira Gandhi Center of the Arts in New Delhi, to teach a course in the visual culture of India, and supported a new academic professorship in the classic music of India. Linda and I sometimes exchanged roles. She proposed that I collaborate with her on an unusual concept for the Baroque Festival in medieval music, specifically the sacred music of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century cloistered abbess, mystic, and composer. Linda organized the student singers. I studied Hildegard's notation and conducted the singers at Holy Cross Church. Linda improvised organ intonations for each piece. Her proposal for collaboration was typical of her extraordinary diversity, rich imagination, and organizational skills. I was recently touched in a more personal way by Linda's thoughtfulness and generosity. Last spring, she gave me a Landini lily, a rare black silken flower that she had grown. It was about to bloom. We both agreed that it probably had no connection at all to Francesco Landini, Italy's most famous 14th century composer, but the name Landini is why she bought it, and that's why she wanted me to have it. Every summer, when it grows and blooms again, I will think of Linda and remember her thoughtfulness and, of course, her advice. The best and most rewarding music, she told me, is the music that you make and play yourself. Linda has touched all who are gathered here today and many more. She will be missed but remembered, and in many ways will remain with us. Linda's passing is not my first experience with personal loss. As we get older, personal loss, like our own passing, is inevitable. But I find these following thoughts of mine to be comforting. In time, we are connected. It wasn't always so for us, but now it ever will be. like stones that drop in water, whose ripples spread forever, spreading and intersecting. There is no shore to make their end, and so they spread, diminished but unending and ever wider. We are the ripples that came before. Our actions are stones that keep alive the cosmic dance of life and death and moments rich in intersecting lives. The ripples of Linda's life continue in the consequences of her work and in the effect that she has had on all of us and what we may do because of her. They spread far beyond this place and this gathering of family and friends. Our next speaker is another colleague of Linda, Professor Lita Miller.
I find it almost surrealistic to be standing here and speaking in memoriam to Linda, who changed my life in so many ways and whom I considered one of my closest friends on the music faculty. The hole that she has left in our personal and our musical lives is deep, and there's no way that we're going to be able to fill it. I came to Santa Cruz in 1980 to join the UCSC music faculty. And Linda immediately recruited me to play Baroque flute, which I had just dabbled in for very occasionally. I was a modern flute player, and the Baroque flute was very different from the modern flute in many, many ways. But typically she showed complete faith in my ability to learn this instrument and immediately programmed me to play Bach's coffee cantata. Well, I think she knew that the flute part for the coffee cantata is not terribly difficult. And so it was okay, but I was amazed at the faith that she had in me. She didn't know me at all. And as we continued to perform for many years, she progressively gave me more and more difficult pieces to play, till we were, one concert played probably the most difficult piece for the flute. Well, Linda was absolutely unparalleled as a harpsichordist. Now, most of you probably know, but maybe some of you don't, that when a harpsichordist plays with a solo instrument or with an orchestra, they're playing figured bass, which means the left-hand part is written out, but the right-hand part is improvised. There are numbers underneath the bass line, and the harpsichordist fills in and improvises a right-hand part based on the harmonies indicated by these numbers. Linda could sight read any figured bass. She didn't have to practice. She just read the numbers right off, and she improvised a right-hand part, and it was never the same. From one rehearsal to the next, to the concert, the right-hand part was always different because she was so imaginative that she was always changing it. And she never made a mistake. I never heard her made an error. However, one time when we were performing, I made a mistake, and she immediately imitated that mistake so that it sounded deliberate. Well, this business of her improvising this right-hand part and never playing it the same was really a problem for the recording engineer because, as many of you know, when you make a recording, you splice. And he would say, "Linda, please, could you play it the same way twice so that we can make a splice if we need to?" Well, several people have already mentioned that she played the accordion. Well, I had always assumed that she was a pianist. But I'll add a couple of comments to this. She told me that playing the accordion was teenage rebellion. Her mom wanted her to play the piano, and she decided she'd play the accordion. The other thing is, Ed mentioned that she won a national competition, but he didn't say what she played. She played one of the Liszt piano concertos on the accordion. Her humanity and her devotion to the disadvantaged in society was manifest in numerous ways, and most important among them was her support for our students, and especially those who had come through difficult circumstances. Now, in part, this was a result of just of her kind nature and her empathy for other human beings, but in part, it was part of her own background. She grew up with a single mother, and she was so poor at one point in her life that she told me that she and her mother picked up rice off of the church steps after a wedding. She was a welcoming colleague. We collaborated with other faculty members, and she was always open to new ideas. I recall sitting on this stage with two ensembles, a gamelan down on that end, or maybe the gamelan was on this end, whatever, and the other side of the stage had a chamber orchestra. And she had me run back and forth between the two with my flute and play with one and then with the other. So, Linda, I mean, I could tell you many, many stories, but I'm not going to take up the time. I miss you so much, Linda, and I cherish the memories of our concerts together. You even had costumes made for us for the Baroque Festival. I have a picture on my wall of myself with a Baroque flute in a Baroque costume that Linda had made for all the players in that concert. I've preserved you, Linda, not only in many concert recordings, but in the many CDs that we recorded. You made a huge impact, not only on your colleagues and friends, but also on the musical world that will live on after you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Max Schmieder. I'm a student of Linda's. We met in 1993 in the music stacks. I was a sophomore, and I was looking for the Goldberg Variations. And there was this ginger-haired lady next to me who wanted to know what I was looking for, and I remember that that was the first time I saw that look in her eye, that sparkle. And that sparkle said, "You are one of us." And I didn't know what she meant, but it was that clear. She gave me, like, "You are one of us." And she smiled, and the score was in my hand within just like a few seconds. And I never forgot that moment. I started taking lessons with her a couple of years later, not knowing who she was until she opened the harpsichord practice room door for the first time, and I realized it was her. And we went off on an adventure that lasted years. I can't even begin to tell you how extraordinary these lessons were. She brought her full knowledge and about music. She had an extraordinary understanding of how music interacted with society. And she could trace a C sharp to an eyebrow movement in an 18th century courtroom and explain how it all made sense together. She loved to embody these spirits. And there were some spirits that she didn't like to embody, too. Musical costumes that she said she didn't want to put on, that I really liked to put on, like Beethoven. But I'm going to keep this very short because we have a guest, a surprise guest who I'm so delighted, has managed to fly here, who is another student of Linda's. And she orchestrated a campaign to get Linda recognized for the Excellence in Teaching Award. And I've always been so grateful to her for that. She's here. In a moment, I'll introduce her. I guess I want to let you know about two projects, or one project and one anecdote I'd like to leave you with. The project is, I've been going through her paperwork, trying to preserve her intellectual legacy. She did not publish nearly as much as she accomplished academically. What she published is like the tip of an iceberg. And I think many of us who've interacted with her felt that we were interacting with a facet of this jewel. She was maybe the most multifaceted academic personality in general that I've ever experienced, and I think that's a shared experience. You get sometimes glimpses into these other parts of her, and it's just astounding. Many of you may not know, for example, that in her retirement, she was taking, in the summer times, dugout canoes, into the Mentawai Islands, where she was forging and learning from her shamanic friends and developing this deep knowledge of this other musical culture. There are so many aspects to her career that it just blows me away. And I will be at some point publishing online a kind of memorial for her in a blog-like form. And I'd be so appreciative if people who are interested would share with me their anecdotes and experiences that they would be willing to see published online. And I'll leave you with this anecdote because I love the image, and I think you'll like this too. This is an image that I think is fitting for what she meant for us. In my first year as a graduate student in '97, I went through a really bad breakup. I went through like 26 breakups because it was starting on my birthday. My girlfriend kept changing her mind, so we kept going through. We were both so naive, so neither of us knew what we were doing. So I went through about a breakup a week, and Linda was like, we got to cheer you up. So the way she could just manifest things. I mean, the way we opened doors was like how Linda manifested grants and scholarships for this and that. So she manifested a trip to UC Santa Barbara, and before I knew it, I was picked up one morning at 6, and we were in a single prop plane flying down it was my first time in a prop plane. We got to Santa Barbara, and we schmoozed with all these other UC professors from all over the state, and they were grad students. And we're just eating, bagels and drinking coffee and talking, and it was just fun. Then we decided to go on an adventure. She had that sly look in her eye. She was always loving to surprise people. So we went off, we explored the campus, we eavesdropped on their early music ensemble, they were terrific. So we just stood there and really enjoyed the strings for a long time. But that wasn't the destination she had in mind. There was this big tower approaching, big white Lord of the Rings tower coming up. And we walked straight to that. And there was someone waiting at the bottom, and there was an elevator, and we went up to the top, and we were in the Carillon Tower. Now, the Carillon has a different kind of a keyboard. This keyboard consists of sticks, polished sticks that stick out of a wall. And in order to play the keyboard, in order to play those bells, you don't push with your fingers or your hand, you punch with your fist. And I will make a controversial claim that of all the instruments that was most perfectly suited to Linda, yeah. Now, those of you who've seen her, just go on, those of you who've seen her, riff and improvise on the kendong in her Balinese ensemble, and that's a percussion instrument, you've seen, a delightful exuberance that could not really come out on the harpsichord. I mean, the harpsichord, this is controversial, yes, I know. There was just a fiery exuberance that came from beating something. And her sense of rhythm was really, I think, the secret sauce. There's a lot of secret sauce. I think she had an amazing sense of rhythm. So she pulled out of her bag modern Japanese compositions in the style of Japanese lullabies, and just played the most beautiful music from that tower. And which people wouldn't have expected, too. Like, that's not typically what you hear emanating from a carillon. And it worked so well. And there I was, just watching her and admiring her. And then she had a part for me to play. She taught me a simple bass line, and so I was like, okay, just like 3 notes, and I was pounding. And this was time for Linda's inner Jimi Hendrix to come out. She started improvising. And she was just, the pounding worked so well for her. And the improvising, the melodic making, it really brought, I just saw the fusion of like her percussive spirit and her melodic spirit come together in the most perfect way I've ever seen. And I kept stopping, actually. I was like, because if Jimi Hendrix is like playing next to you, you're gonna be like forgetting what you're doing. So I kind of messed it up a couple times. But that, to me, is an image I want to leave you with, because that's one of my favorite images. I think of Linda up there, 18 stories up, emanating music in all directions, all around her, to the heavens. Her music enveloping, bathing the denizens, bathing them in her spirit, in her music-loving spirit. And with a little wounded bird at her side, who she wanted to share that experience with. So I talked longer than I was planning on, but I had to tell you about that. The person I want to introduce you to, her name is Elizabeth Crabtree, and she, like I said, she just flew here, and she just decided, she's so busy, she's on the market now, she's about to get her PhD in music education. And she was also profoundly affected by Linda as a student. And Elizabeth, why don't you come on up here and take the mic? Yeah, great, Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so honored and grateful to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of Linda today, because she was such a special person who had a profound impact on not only my life, but the lives of thousands of students in this music program here at UC Santa Cruz. I met Linda 27 years ago when I was an undergrad. I was quite lost at the time and searching for direction, and she took the reins and steered me onto my path, changing the course of my life completely. Linda helped me find my passion as a music educator, and soon I will be following in her footsteps as a university professor. It was like with Max, it was a completely random chance that we crossed paths. I was actually a theater major at UCLA, and I was just visiting UC Santa Cruz as a guest student for 1 quarter. I happened to sit down next to Linda in the Porter Dining Hall, and we began chatting. And in less than 30 minutes, she had decided that this student she had just met would take a full load of music classes and join her Balinese gamelan class. Right then and there, she wrote me a note to get me out of the theory placement exams. That's who she was. It was not long after that that Linda encouraged me to stay for a 2nd quarter and then eventually to transfer to UC Santa Cruz, writing my letter of recommendation. Later, when I was struggling academically as my mother was dying from cancer, Linda stepped in as a surrogate mother, and she was a real mama bear. She took me in as her harpsichord student, which was unusual for an undergrad. She helped me get scholarships for lessons. She prepared me for a senior recital. Last time I was on this stage was right here playing the Goldbergs with Linda as my mentor. She got me an ArtsBridge scholarship, which was my first teaching experience working with children in schools. And because of her, teaching music has now been my career for the past 23 years. In addition to guiding my career and my path, I fondly remember Linda as a kind and caring and humorous teacher. In a world full of right notes and wrong notes and parallel fifths, Linda would laugh at my mistakes with a lightness and humor that let me know that it was all okay. Those mistakes were okay. I was supported. I was not harshly judged. And she was a living model of that growth mindset. After playing in her Balinese gamelan ensemble for several years, Linda hosted me at her home in Bali while I was studying music and dance there. And I am not the only student. I know she extended that hospitality to. She's opened her home to many students over the years. Without Linda's guidance, encouragement, and the pure force of her will, I would not be who I am today. In fact, I can't even imagine who I would be if I hadn't met her. A few years ago, Linda and I met for coffee, and she encouraged me to pursue the PhD because, as she wisely told me, a woman can never have too many qualifications. But it wasn't just me who felt the loving force of Linda's guidance and mentorship. Back in 2000, when I nominated Linda for the Excellence in Teaching Award from UC Santa Cruz, which she was awarded, dozens of my peers signed the nomination form in support of her. The award recognized her for inspiring students to notice how music encodes a world of meaning as it comes from, hovers above, and returns to silence within a culture, and for teaching multicultural perspectives that illuminate all forms of music while establishing connections and resonances among them. She was incredibly generous with her time and her spirit. I will always remember her as a true force of nature, a fighter for her students, and someone who was not to be defied, though she used her influence for good, thankfully. Classmates of mine from the music program were as saddened as I was by her passing last summer, and they shared the following remembrances of her, which I would like to now share with you. Linda was one of a kind. In pianoforte lessons, Linda would be playing the left page but looking ahead at the right page and laughing. It was my favorite thing. She enriched our lives and made us all smarter. I think of Linda whenever I hear hemiola. No one ever plays them as beautifully as Linda demonstrated. She had an unexpected wit about her that I enjoyed so much. I loved her. She used to tease me during theory classes, but I knew it was out of love. She was a fearless advocate for us. Linda was a very caring professor. The trip to Indonesia with her changed the course of my life. Linda was a truly brilliant woman and an incredibly pivotal teacher who left an indelible mark. She was astonishing, brilliant, and always supportive. She was an incredible musician, scholar, and advocate. She was also my greatest teacher. Many of these former students, like me, have gone on to become teachers themselves or performing musicians. We all feel Linda's loss, but she lives on now through the countless lives that she touched, and the lives her many students now continue to impact. While we are mourning today, may we also find a moment to celebrate and honor this enduring legacy that she leaves behind in us. And I would like to now introduce you to Vlada Volkama Moran to perform J.S. Bach's transcription of Marcello's Concerto in D minor.
I'm Ontario Alexander, a third-year graduate student here at UC Santa Cruz and a board member of the Santa Cruz Baroque Festival. I met Linda shortly after I began my studies here. She immediately took an interest in me as a person and quickly recruited me to be a member of her board. She was very supportive of me and my research interest, and oftentimes shared stories with me of her early life in Los Angeles. And she also supported me through one of the things that Linda was really good at was connecting people. She had a friend that lived in Paris who was going to be spending the summer in Los Angeles, and I expressed to her that I was going to go to Paris to study French last summer. So she said, well, I have a friend who's going to be in LA, and you can stay in her apartment, but I'm going to talk to her. And she convinced her friend to allow me to rent her apartment while she was in Paris, while she was in LA and I was in Paris. That's a support that I never even expected that would to come just from talking to her early on in my studies here. And during the time I was in Paris, I started to kind of face a period of uncertainty about my future here at UC Santa Cruz. And Linda, while in Bali, was in constant communication with me while I was in Paris, and very, very helpful to me during that time. A person like Linda, who is known by so many people, we all have come to know her in various ways. Some of you may know Linda as a leader, the fierce, unstoppable leader in her academic career and also the Santa Cruz Baroque Festival. Some of you may have known her as the intellectual academic who was knowledgeable on many arrays and areas of musical concepts, ideas, and literature. Some of you have known Linda as the nurturer, nurturing the talents and abilities in others that they didn't even know that they had, and also giving them, through that nurturing, the confidence to rid themselves of self-doubt. Some of you have known Linda as that dedicated person who was dedicated to her craft, her purpose, her family, to helping others, to her mission in her music and in her relationships with others. And then some of you may have known Linda as that amiable person whose personality you just could not resist to love. However you may have come to know Linda, let us all hold her dear as we move forward with her in our hearts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christopher Smith. Recovering from a cold, so I got my bottle of water here to keep my throat as clear as it can be. It's an interesting, my life with Linda, my knowledge and relationship with her over the years was very interesting. First it began before I ever met her when I was a student down in San Diego, UC San Diego in the music department, and I was taking a theory class as an undergraduate. And and my teacher, a cellist named Peter Farrell, some of you might know him, or knew him, and he just one day in the class, this was traditional harmony and such, and he said, we had to learn a Bach chorale and write it out from memory. That was our big test at the end of the year. But he said, if you ever make it up to the Bay Area and Santa Cruz, I just recommend you have to go listen to this. If you can find a concert by this harpsichordist, Linda Burman-Hall. And we're like, well, why that? He said, she is the most amazing harpsichordist I've ever heard. She, just as it was already attested to here tonight, or today, that she could just realize a figured bass like a jazz player, Art Tatum could improvise a jazz riff. And he said, I've just never met someone I can just play, and she just takes it and goes with it, and you're kind of riffing with her. And so here goes a few more years. I meet a professor who was visiting down there, became my advisor here at the university, invited me to come up here to be one of the first graduate students in the program, of which I'm lucky to see tonight we have Gina Fatone, who's going to be playing on the gamelan, came from the East Coast, Bates College, and Phil Collins, of course, an icon in the community. And so we were sort of one of these fledgling groups of graduate students. So, of course, Ed and Lita are all part of that cadre that we worked under and studied from, as we did with Linda. And so my life is kind of bookend with this. As a graduate student then coming here, and she was the one who actually called me to tell me I was accepted to the grad program. So, but when I got here, I soon learned that she did not, she was uncompromising in many ways, and we kind of tread carefully. We kind of got the word, be careful. She's really tough and very strict in some ways, and so we were kind of wary of her. I think a few of us at least were. And I remember it was never expressed more than when I was doing my qualifying exams. And of course, she comes into the room and puts a score, and figured bass is part of it, right? Part of the qualifying. And of course, I'm a piano player, but figure bass is not my thing. I kind of dabbled it in their class. But to do this, I was just petrified. And to complete this little exercise with the figured bass, I'm thinking, I'm done. Okay, what's she going to say? What's she going to say? And she goes, that wasn't bad. And I thought, and someone told me later, if she said that wasn't bad, it was actually pretty good. So I kind of took that as okay later. But at the time, I was so nervous. So yeah, but we did. A lot of us did walk a little bit in fear. You didn't want to cross her, or this kind of thing. That was sort of the scuttlebutt, as grad students. And I just wanted to make a few points here, and I'm riffing here today. I'm kind of actually taking her whole idea of what she did musically with my words tonight. They're more or less off of point, so this is my figured bass here today. She had, I'm associated with the Santa Cruz Baroque Festival now. I'm on the board of directors there, as is Ontario. And we've worked really hard. And so I knew her as a student, and then the interim years, until about 4 years ago, not much. I mean, I went to a concert, I think, with her performing and such. So, but the touch points weren't many until the last few years. But then we spent a lot of time together with the Baroque Festival and then with KSQD, which Rachel Ann Goodman's going to be speaking shortly, when they recreated the local community radio station here. She was instrumental in starting that up as well. Again, many of her talents just organizing, getting things going. And I worked with her on that with the music programs, and she would come in and color commentate on the Santa Cruz Baroque Festival offerings in the past seasons. And I found that she always, as people were testing here tonight, always had a positive thing to say, always encouraging. And I will just say that we made it to our 50th season last year with her. And she always said, that to make it as a nonprofit arts organization in anywhere is pretty tough, and in a small community like Santa Cruz is quite remarkable. One of the oldest, in this area, nonprofit arts organization that exists, and it's made it to its 50th year. Now we're into our 51st year, which we're very happy to have made it. And when she passed, there was a hole. I mean, the board of directors, we regrouped about a week or two later, and so what do? Do we pick up the pieces? How do we go on? Do we cancel the season? But Linda, again, had a plan, and she'd already put it in place, right? Tireless worker. She once told me, hey, if you want to call me late. And I said, well, how late? I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning? And I'm like, really? She said, no, I'm usually up late, and so we had late conversations in the last years, and I'm a night owl, so it was easy to do. At midnight, my wife was in bed, and I could go and call her, and we could talk about planning. But what really happened was a few years ago, I was going to Germany. My wife is German, and she's from the center part of Germany, Erfurt. And she knew I was going there, and she said, and just before she left, or before I left, she said to me, after one of our encounters, she said, just do something interesting out there, when you go. And okay, I'm doing family things mostly with my wife and her family, but I got an invitation to go see a festival in Arnstadt, which is about a 20-minute train ride from her town. And I met and heard a wonderful organist who's here this evening, will be playing. I'm sure many of you might be attending that concert. And when I brought the CDs of Jörg Redden, because I heard him and I encountered him after the show and said, hey, do you have some CDs or something I'd like to play on my radio show? And he said yes. And he said, wait a minute, just a moment. And he ran up to his choir loft, came back down, gave me a bunch of CDs, and a week and a half later, I'm back in California, and I'd listened to them, and I thought they were quite good. And I gave them to Linda. I said, take a listen to these. What do you think of this? Just listen to these recordings that I just got. And a week later, she called me up, and she said, I'd listened to those CDs that you gave me. And I said, well, what'd you think? And she said, I think we need to bring him here as the artist in residence, which we've never had. She made a big point of that. She said, it's about time we infuse the festival with some other energy, and I've been doing this for 50 years and so forth. So she really, even in her passing, she had already set up this year, and we just needed to get Jörg Redden here. But she had the plan, she had the repertoire, and we looked, when we talked about this at the board, we said, she put this together, we just need to get him here. And now we're lucky we have it. So her legacy is still felt. And I just wanted to say that even talking about one other point that I found really quite funny, that how she would recruit people to do things they didn't think they would otherwise do, right? Last year we had the festival, and she asked me one day, she said, what's the highest note you can sing? Because she knew I sang in choirs and stuff. And I said, well, I'm kind of a middle tenor. I can comfortably do an F above middle C. Well, she asked me, she said, can you do an F above middle C? And I said, yeah, that's right there, my sweet spot, I think still. And she said, good. You're going to be in an ensemble singing the Cantus Firmus for Viderunt Omnes by Periton at our concert, in a few months. So within a week, I'm in rehearsals with her, singing with her, and she's saying the Cantus Firmus with us. So really, she had a remarkable way to reel you in and take you along on a journey you never thought you'd be taking. So to that extent, I owe a lot to her. The last few years, I'm so glad I reconnected with her. It's left a lasting impression on me and all of those who have met her and worked with her in even recent years. And I know, I will say this with regards to the festival. She told me, and it's really sad, and I've talked about this to Jörg Redden about this, who is in the audience today. She said, I'm so looking forward for Jörg to get here. She'd only talked to him on the phone, on meetings and such. And she said, I really want to sit down on a harpsichord with him and trade aids. And that was so, because he plays harpsichord too. So I regret that she won't be able to do that. Jörg said, he really was hoping, but this whole festival season this year is dedicated to her, of course, and hopefully in the future. So I think she teed it up for us this year, and hopefully we can carry it on, the tradition that she started, and I know we have her support, and that's why we carried on, and I'm happy to have been part of that and to be part of that. So thank you very much, and thank you, Ontario. He's on the team.
Hi, I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and I came more recently into Linda's orbit, but I can't believe it was such a short amount of time. I can't still believe she's gone. So I'm going to share a few things. I'm the board chair of KSQD Radio, and some of my colleagues are here. And just listening to Chris's account of how long Linda has been part of this community, she didn't just stay on the Hill here. She integrated deeply into the history of Santa Cruz. And I believe she was early on the air at KUSP. And we were debating, I was talking about the name of that show. Somebody said it was Baroque and Eggs, but I'm not sure that's true. Was it? True, okay. So that was not a joke. Okay, great. So happy. And that says so much about Linda. Because she had that whimsy about her. And she really understood the power of community of radio to share music like gamelan, things that commercial radio would never have touched. Ethnic music, they used to call it, somebody called it flies buzzing around a lampshade, but that was not fair. This was music that was intellectual, it was deep, and only stations like KUSP were playing it back then. In fact, I would say that radio station, because it broadcast all these festivals, the Bach Festival, the Baroque Festival, the Monterey Jazz Festival, was responsible for cultivating in this community a love of world music that lives to this day. Many bands were inspired by listening to that station. So she goes way back, and when KUSP went bankrupt in 2016, she and many of us, so many listeners, were bereft. We were just, verklempt. It was a disaster in so many ways after 40 years of broadcasting. But it wasn't long before the mourning turned into action, and Linda was right there. People have talked about her tenacity. That was necessary, considering what we went through in birthing that station. She was our North Star in so many ways. There were midnight conversations there too, Chris, when you needed to be reassured that it was really going to happen. We were going to really do this thing, start a new station. After all of that, she was there saying, yes, we will do this, and I know it's going to happen. So she was there with her tireless volunteerism, her energy, and her tenacity. And one short story I want to share with you, well, two very short stories, because I know there's a lot more people who are going to be speaking. One was during the ribbon cutting, there was this moment when Linda had bought these giant scissors, and the ribbon was there, and we were about to turn on K-Squid, this brand new station that had never been on the air in Santa Cruz at 90.7. After years of fundraising and struggle and obstacles, there we were, and she cut that ribbon, and I have an image of this look on her face that I still have the photograph. It's sheer triumph, like we did this thing, and here we are with a brand new station. And I'll never forget her smile right then. It will always stay in my heart. Linda understood how a station like K-Squid or any community station could be a bridge between the university and the community of Santa Cruz, which has not always been there, that bridge. It keeps being rebuilt. And so she created this show called The Cutting Edge, which shone a spotlight on faculty research. And that show is still on Sunday nights after 5 years of the station being on the radio. It lives on with Tim Fitzmaurice and Nada Milkovich and other people carrying that torch of, hey, let's shine a light on these professors' great work, whatever it might be. One last story I want to share, and it comes to mind. She always came to her work at K-Squid with a sense of whimsy and creativity that she showed in her music and everything she did. And one day, before we went on the air in 2018, someone called the station and said, hey, we have this giant squid. Do you want it? And they had created a giant 12-foot red neoprene squid with light-up eyes and tentacles for some art party in San Jose. Guess they know how to party down there. And Linda and Sandy Stone, who's in the audience, said, of course we want it. Are you kidding? They got in the car and they drove to San Jose and they retrieved Squidmore, who became our mascot. And we still schlep him around to various activities. Before she left on her last trip, Linda was planning to put Squidmore in the front seat of her, I think it was a Ford, I'm not sure the name of her car, but she had a vintage car. And she was going to stick him in the front seat and drive him around Santa Cruz as a promotional thing at the next parade. So I'm hoping maybe still in her honor we will do that. So I will miss so much that sense of play and her red hair and her wisdom. And so on behalf of all the 150 volunteers at K-Squid, we send our condolences to Serena and Tim and the hundreds of friends she leaves behind. Linda collected during her many, many years in Santa Cruz. Thank you.
I'm very honored to be here. I'm Phil Collins, Artistic Director for the New Music Works. And after hearing these very touching accounts, very personal accounts, Max's especially, which I'd had no idea of those things, I feel rather peripheral in Linda's life. But we were very aware of each other and in often contact, and our groups have been reciprocal. So I've enjoyed and benefited our collegial friendship for about 4.5 decades. And over the years, we've performed with one another's groups and helped each other's organizations. I conducted a work for the Baroque Festival commissioned by Robert Strisich that was rather thorny to play without leadership, so I conducted that, and Linda's performed with the New Music Works on numerous occasions on instruments going from harpsichord to microtonally tuned tack piano. And she was always featured as a featured soloist. Linda was one of the first musicians I met when I moved from San Francisco to Santa Cruz in 1976. Lou Harrison had put us in touch together because I was on a search for finding 15 early music instrumentalists. I was doing a concert called New Music for Old Friends, something that Lou Harrison wrote a piece for. And Linda was very helpful, was bubbling with ideas, and of course connected. So at that time it wasn't that easy to corral together early music players, but we managed. And around that time I heard Linda play for the first time, and it was at Calvary Church, and it was sponsored by the Festival of Living Music. And I'd been notified of that group by my teacher at San Francisco State, Stanley Butens, and he said, you should go check this group out. And it was revelatory for me in Baroque music. Linda played Bach and Couperin, and there might have been a Brandenburg concerto on the concert, I don't recall. But the presentation, and I just loved her spontaneous way of putting music across and her spot-on accuracy. It was I loved the title, Festival of Living Music, and I went along with the change to Baroque Festival, but to me it represented something about the way Linda approached music, and when she took on doing gamelan, that clarified her larger musicality that I'd only know peripherally. For 2 decades after that, I was the music reviewer for the Santa Cruz Sentinel, and I was paid to go watch the Baroque Festival and hear Linda's playing, and it was a real opportunity. I really enjoyed it. Linda had the rare gift of being able to integrate scholastic and artistic dimensions into a unified whole. Highly intelligent, creatively minded, she relished both research and performance, and she expertly expressed the complementary values in concert. Her program notes and her lectures would resonate with inspired scholarship, and her virtuosic performances would then move us with the divine musical realities. And she played a fantastic piece on harpsichord with Chinese Zhong duet for us, and I couldn't find the program, so I can't tell you the year, but it was ferociously virtuosic and impeccably played. It was we had it from a recording from the composer, and I think Germany, and we were all on pins and needles. Can this be even done again? And Linda worked so hard with her, and the Zhong player, Zhong is the board zither of China, and and when we invited New Zealand musicians, Maori musicians, and Jack Boddy, the ethnomusicologist from New Zealand and composer, Linda was right there. She knew Jack from conferences, and they were babbling about gamelan, and she was an avid person to hear the Maori singers. I mean, she was just right there. And I don't have a lot of stories, but one funny instance is I was in the early 2000s, I don't know what year, and I was in my car, and I just turned on her show, which Baroque and Eggs is the title, I guess. I didn't know it was hers, but it was in the middle of a Baroque string piece that was moving along, you know, underway, quite nice. And then it suddenly turned into havoc with polytonality and and polyrhythms. And I go, oh, that must be Alfred Schnittke, you know, the polystylist, or maybe some Ives piece has been turned up. And I called her up, and I said as much, and she just howled. You're off by 350 years. It's from 1670s. It's Bieber's Battaglia. And ever since then, I became a real fan of Bieber in general, who was an amazing composer. But she just delighted that she was putting one over, because I didn't hear the announcement of the piece prior, and I just thought this has to be a contemporary composer. So that's it. And I'd like to thank Barbara Bierstein for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, and thank you, the Broke Festival, and it's a great event to a great woman. Thanks.
First draft of what I wanted to say to you was about 26 pages. Two or three things came out. We gotta cut it down a little bit. I'm gonna go places that most of you won't know about. Linda went to the second to the worst school in the in Los Angeles. No academic classes whatsoever. Her choral teacher in the second to the worst school in Los Angeles took her under his wing and mentored her. About 13 of those pages. I think that I'm going to impose on Max and ask him to publish some of what I'm not going to tell you today. So be willing to listen to his stories later. I wish he had told me about the Santa Barbara thing earlier, because that plays into something I wanted to discuss with you guys. That about 3 years ago, Linda was the featured player at Boom area. We sat in that little chapel and I thought, wow, I got this cool seat. I can see her face. I can watch. Just before she started, a little bit late, I'm sorry, it hurts. She turned around, and there was 3 people in there, including me. And she looked pained for a moment. And she turned and waved me off. She didn't want anything. And she played that old pipe organ the way Max described her playing that thing, except with her fingers. She played, my personal word is she played it like she attacked it. When she was done, I was surprised she hadn't broken the damn thing. And it really was. She played as though she was trying to punish you for not showing up by playing the best she's ever played. And man, she did. And by the way, it's been about 10 years ago since Linda was diagnosed with bone-on-bone arthritis in her right shoulder. So everything you've heard her play since then has been through a cloud of pain, and she chose that route as opposed to possibly losing some skill. I'm going to go back to the mentor thing. The mentor took her as a gifted young person studying accordion, moved her sideways, got her a job as an organist while she was still in high school. So she had some money. She also had some monies coming in from some appearances in Hollywood because she was the contest winner of and by the way, it was an adult division that she won at 13. Now, to say the truth, her accordion teacher had one other student that was that good, so okay, it wasn't all on her, but boy, she still won that contest. And you know what? If you look at the pictures of her with accordion up there, you'll get how goddamn good she was at it because she loved it. But she also gave it up. There's really not a lot of work for accordionists here in the United States. And especially, the one that she's played there is the one that plays the full symphony orchestra instrumentation all at once, which she could easily do. I'm going to describe some of her things. Her skill, you guys know a lot about what she achieved. But I want to try and go back up to what she started with. She had perfect pitch. Apparently it was genetic. Her brother had perfect motor. He could identify any car that came up the block. It was hot rod country. It was the cool thing to do. But she had perfect pitch. She could hear and identify everything precisely. And she could duplicate it when necessary. She goes someplace, I missed some things with her. I simply didn't ask when I should have. I'm sorry, I can't give you the data. But she could sight read faster than most people. I talked to Max the other day and we discussed that basically Linda could hear anything she ever heard, by the way. I'm going to divert. I'm going to come back to this other thing in a second. Linda and I were talking about something. We were trying to discuss how two oboes played together. And she pulled in some works and we played them on the CD. And I was struggling to describe my thoughts on it. And she just kind of casually says, well, you can dismiss the number 2 guy because his reed is going. We're listening to a symphony. said, Linda, what are you talking about? How can you possibly hear the reed of one of the two players when the whole symphony is going? She just said, well, I just tune them out. She shut down the whole symphony orchestra, including the other oboe, and listened to the one guy. Yeah. It's okay. I want you to hold on to that thought. What we're going to do is try and take you to what Dr. Linda Burman-Hall and Dr. Thomas Geisman, who's a primatologist, were doing at the invited speakers at the Asian Primatology Conference for the year. They jointly did a paper which basically, if anybody like Lena mentioned, Linda wrote it. No question about it. Thomas is a wonderful person and an Eagle Scout and a great friend. But Linda wrote the paper that they turned in because of her skills, which I'm going to try and tell you about. So you know that she has perfect pitch. And you know she can differentiate and reach into a what's the term, calligraphy? An instrument, a heavy instrument piece, and pick out one. So those two things, you know. All right. Thomas Geisman is one of the lead primatologists on the planet. Linda happened to need, she financed some, she did research on in the shaman of the islands out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And that was part of her work and her thesis that she was working on. But what she discovered is that the shaman had a very intimate relationship with the spirits of the gibbons. The gibbons play a tremendous part in their religion. And what they do and what they sing and how they sing it means a lot. So, and Thomas Geisman, by the way, has been doing this for 40 years. He's in the jungle every summer for about 3 or 4 months recording, both mechanically recording and his own observations of what's going on. So what's going on is the males are out there causing trouble. The females are orchestrating a family unit or two. The thing is that often siblings are leaders at a later time in their life, and they're habitating that tree, and that tree are two different girls, possibly siblings. They're very likely siblings because they like each other. They sing to each other. They have duetting solos early in the morning. It turns out that Linda, and this is purely a conversational accident with Thomas. We were vacationing in Switzerland, and he said something, a little weird. She said something about it's a matriarchy, and they're probably sisters, but they're speaking slightly differently than they speak to the rest of the tribe, their children. And he says, what? What are you talking about? She said, the language they use amongst their siblings is different than the language they use to speak to their children. Not much, but a little bit. You can spot it if you listen carefully enough. Well, Thomas, is a normal human, He's doing the best he can. He's been listening for 40 years. And he's taken lessons from Linda. His eyes are big, appropriately. So what you see here is that Linda, with her skill of being able to reach out and identify each individual voice and tell you what they're doing relative to each other and what they're doing relative to the children, just by the sound. She has quadrupled his research of 40 years by giving him this methodology. Max and I talked about it the other day, and I said, well, you know, all they have to do now is get a computer program to duplicate Linda. And of course, he laughed. He's right. I was exaggerating, but that would do it if you could, if anybody was that good. You could gather that much more data because of her skills. And that she worked some of it for Thomas before she passed. Now, she died at that conference. I haven't had it to ask Thomas whether it was before or after, but he was with her. And she was doing precisely what she enjoyed the most, winning and being the best, which she was pretty good at not rubbing that in. You know? She really was. She was. I was thinking earlier, probably when she was 13, and beat dozens of men and professional musicians at their trade, that she was told to knock it, you know, hold back. Don't be so gleeful. But if you look at the pictures, you can tell that she is. But I'm pretty sure she was told to hide that. And she was pretty good at it. Often, you think of Linda getting ready and to go out and do something. And she put demure on last. On her way out the door, it was quiet, what you see there, you know. Man, but you know what? She loved winning. She really did. She loved being top dog, even if she didn't bark for anybody. See what else I've got. I'm going to go with you one thing, which doesn't deal with her abilities. It has to deal with who she really was. After 2 weeks in the Mentawai jungle, which isn't real pleasant, her translator and Linda were at the bar of the hotel, the ramshackle hotel, for their first cold drink and possibly go to the room to get cleaned up for the first time in 2 weeks. It's miserable out there, by the way, guys. It's really, really bad. 2 weeks in that jungle, it sucks. She overheard drunken government men. Now, we're Americans. We're not used to governments that are totally criminal. But some of them are, and that's where she was, okay? Totally criminal. These guys are they're drunkenly celebrating the fact that they've figured out how to decimate the native population and put it on palm oil. Oh, and by the way, in a couple of years when the girls they'll not have any food and no way to make a living, they'll be ready for you in the afternoon. Linda didn't take too well to that. She also traveled with a wad of hundreds quite often, almost all the time. So she took a few of them and handed them to the hotel guy, said, keep them drunk. She got a couple girls from the other room. Thank you, honey. She got a couple girls that hang around in bars and hotels, handed them each 100 and said, see to it they don't leave. And she bought a bucket full of small bills, which in Mentawai is meaningful, because, and she sent, with this bucket of bills, she sent her translator back up the river 7 more hours to get the tribe of people that she'd been at. By the way, she knew that they were deeply committed to their own future because she had ridden up the river with a full boatload of trees that they had purchased. Now, the jungle people don't have money for purchases. The reason she had to send money is because they wouldn't have come to town, because in town, food and drink cost money, and they had none. So she sent these people money so they'd come to town. Explained to them when they got there what the government guys were doing. They'd already faked the signatures of all the elders of the village. The village had given away their rights to the land, according to the government guys. By the way, they came to town. They gently persuaded the government guys to go back to the jungle with them, took their phones, any devices they had from modern time, and kept them in the pig pen. Now, in Bali, not in Bali, in Mentawai, a pig pen is usually something about double the size of this, up off the ground, bamboo, cage. So they each had their own cage, and they were hidden from the government, and government people came looking for them. They were hidden pretty well. They moved them around a lot, I guess is the best way to say it. So the real government, police and such, were unable to find them. And they kept them until the government made a broad public announcement that the island of Mentawai was not open for palm oil in any manner or ever will be. Yeah. Now, what that really means from Linda is that from the day one of that, she was in danger, personal danger, of just simply being killed, taken to jail, and disappeared. Her finances were totally confiscated, and maybe, who knows what else? What else can you do to somebody they would have done to her if they had figured out it was her? Oh, by the way, she financed the education of all the tribes of the island out of her pocket, and sent her translator on the grand tour to see to it that everybody understood what palm oil really was and how bad it really was. So her ethic is a lot greater than you might normally know. I'm going to return to the earliest part there. Her mentor. You want to honor, you want to love Linda? You want to honor Linda? Mentor somebody. Mentor the kid that does your grass to do it better, and how to get more people. but mentor somebody. She went to the worst school, second to worst, in LA. Her family had no knowledge whatsoever of academia, or what to do, or how to go about it. Her mentor carried her through all of that, and a lot of other stuff. She was still visiting with him and his wife in his 92nd birthday before he passed at 93. She had visited with him every few years, his whole life, and exchanged whatever you might call that admiration, mutual and mutual help. And you really should try that, by the way, especially if you love Linda.
Hello, everyone. My voice is definitely off right now. But I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, celebrating such a wonderful, wonderful woman, as you all know. You may be her colleague, her friend, her family, her husband. But most importantly, she was my mother. She was my inspiration and always will be. She was so loving, caring, and honestly very brave every time she went to a different island. My earliest memory of her, and I always think about this because I was really young. I was about 6 or 7, and she came with Dr. Loretta to check up on me to see how I was doing in the orphanage, see if I was healthy, well, and I remember she took me out that one night, and I was sleeping in the same bed as her, and I think Dr. Loretta was sleeping on another one, but I remember I was so uncomfortable, I kept shifting around in the bed, and then eventually I just turned over, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she smiled at me. Like she was really proud and happy, but I was embarrassed and I was shy, so I turned quickly around and faced the other way. But that was one of my dearest memories I'll ever have of her, and I always remember her for that. She was very clever, very clever. I don't think I would have started calling her mom if she didn't do what she did. So as many of you know, I was adopted from Cambodia. When I came to America, the first couple of weeks, I was crying and kicking the door. I just didn't know how to get out, and I wanted to go back home. And eventually she came to me. My dad was somewhere in his office, locked away. He was tired of hearing me. But she looked at me, she's like, and I know she said this, but she told me that's not what she said later. She told me something along the line, if you call me mom, I will let you out. And I thought about it, and I was like, okay, because I didn't know how to turn a knob or unlock the door, and I said, Mom. And then she's like, good. And then she walked away, and I was like, okay. But that is how I started calling her mom. So it's something we always joke about with each other now. She valued education tremendously, tremendously. She didn't know the first time that I had any family, any birth family or birth siblings, and eventually when she found out, she wanted to help by providing them with the money for education, a good education. And I remember one of the time when we went to visit Cambodia, I asked her, Mom, why are all the other houses of the adopted children so nice compared to my birth family's house? And she looks at me and she's like, well, honey, I gave money to your sisters so that they can have an education. And when they have a great education, they'll be able to have a wonderful job and make good money. And then she also said, and I also provided your birth parents with medicine because they were not able to get great health care or any health care of the sort. So I just stopped talking and I understood that. She has always encouraged me to keep in touch with my roots. She's never, I would say she always she always let us visit Cambodia every 5 years, and which I really appreciate. Oh, sorry, I also have notes too, but they're not as long. My mother really loved music. As you know, she was a wonderful harpsichord, accordion, harpsichord player, piano player as well. Her love of music did cause us some troubles, however. Every time I sang, she would always make sure that I'm singing on the right key. If I didn't sing on the right key, she'll make me start all over again. And I took singing to a whole new level. I like to sing in the car, too. I love singing in the car. And unfortunately, when I sing in the car, she forgets that she's driving sometimes. And we've gotten into a lot of fender benders, friendly ones. No one was hurt, but eventually she just said, new rule, no more singing in the car. And so I was like, okay. So I am banned from singing in the car with her. And she always jokes about it with me. But I am so appreciative of her for molding me into the lady that I am today. All the doors of opportunities were there, and sometimes I was so scared to open them. So sometimes she would drag me in, sometimes she'd push me in, sometimes she'd walk in with me. And I feel like I was able to share the most important milestone of my life, which was graduating with a master's of education. I got my teaching credential finally, and but that's because of her. I think without her, I would not be here. Literally, without her and my dad, I would not be here today. So I thank her for that with all my heart. And she never stops to tell me how proud she is. Every time she got a chance, I know she would brag about me to other people too, and I know it, but and the last celebration I had with her was of my graduation at the beach. That was the last time I said goodbye to her was at the airport. I guess I have so many other stories, but I can't right now. But I feel like even though we've lost her, her physical form, I feel like we've gained her spiritual form, and she'll always be there. Traveling won't be the same anymore because she's usually there. She's usually awake and up 3 days before we travel just to get everything packed. So now I'm the one who's going to be doing that now. But thank you everyone so much for coming here and celebrating her. Thank you.
Tyler. That was really beautiful. I'd just like to make a few closing remarks. This came in from Tongol Siajian, a very wonderful and dear friend of Linda's who lives in Jakarta and who she brought here to Santa Cruz many years ago. Linda is no longer among us. Frankly speaking, it is very difficult for me to say what Linda meant to me and to cope with the reality that she is no longer around. I just try to console myself by acknowledging her influence on my work, by memories of happy times and her impact on the many people with whom she interacted. Yes, Linda is no longer among us. On one of my travels, I stood at the edge of a ravine, admiring a giant of a tree on the other side. It was totally quiet, a typical oven-hot tropical afternoon. Suddenly, I heard a creaking noise that was getting louder and louder. The tree started to tremble, and with an almost ear-splitting rumble, the giant tree tumbled into the ravine. A cacophonous cacophony, a raucous cacophony of birds screeching and monkeys screaming broke out. And then all turned dead still again. The contour of the jungle on the other side of the ravine had changed. An enormous hole had spread between the trees. The dark and cool island under the tree was erased by the bright sunlight. When I returned to that same spot several months later, the giant tree was no longer visible. It was all covered by blooming creepers. New growth had shot up where the big tree had once stood. The seed of the giant had sprung up, and that new life was doing well. Linda, that giant tree, is no more. Yet she had taken care that new life will bloom where once she stood. Just think of her courses, her writings, her music recordings, recitals, and of course the Santa Cruz Baroque Festival. Her students, colleagues, and circle of friends are all blessed by having known her and are all doing fine. I personally cannot thank you enough, Linda. With my love, respect, and many tears, Tongol Siajian. Thank you all for coming today to help us celebrate Linda's remarkable life. And please join us in the ensemble room for a lovely reception where we hope we'll share our memories of her together. For those of you, you can enter through this door down here at the bottom of the stage. For those of you at the top, you can go around the lobby and there is an elevator that can take you down the stairs to the first floor where you can walk the steps down, and we look forward to seeing you at the reception. Thank you again for coming on behalf of her family. We're very appreciative.